Today's discussion will be presented in 3 sections since we are recording it for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. You're welcome to post questions and comments during the session, and we'll try to answer them online. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Jason Miller, Executive Editor at Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.
Welcome to the panel discussion. I'm excited to talk about IT modernization, citizen services, and how it's all coming together. My guests are Justin Herman, who leads the Emerging Citizen Technology Program in the General Services Administration, Marcy Jacobs, the Design Practice Director for the U.S. Digital Service in the White House, and Acting Agency Lead for Digital Service Team at the Veterans Affairs Department, Aisha Davina, the former Senior Advisor in the Office of the Administrator at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and Daryl Hillary, the Federal Director of Strategic Alliances for Kodak Alaris. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we get started today, let me set some context for our discussion. In just over 7 years, agencies have submitted more than 149,000 data sets to the data.gov portal. Of those, Commerce and Interior Departments accounted for more than 110,000 of them. Now add to that the data the government's collecting, ranging from cybersecurity to citizen interactions with websites to sensors in the field. It's no wonder some will call this an era of data chaos. Now, some experts estimate that as agencies deal with this huge growth of data, more than 90% of it doesn't live in these neat rows and columns. The inability to harness the data leads to complexity and lost productivity. If agencies can get a handle on this data, it presents a great opportunity for them to save money, become more effective through the flow of information, simplified workflows, and of course, reliable data quality. Now, in fact, 70 federal managers partnered with citizen engagement experts and other open government organizations to develop something called the U.S. Public Participation Playbook. These 12 plays combine best practices and suggested performance metrics for agencies to evaluate and build better services. To meet these citizens' needs, the playbook identified 5 main categories that should be addressed in all programs, whether digital or offline. Now, at the same time, agencies are looking to modernize their technologies. Those back-end processes that help capture and feed data back to them need to change. We all know the lift and shift approach to IT modernization is not a good one. The IT modernization effort is working its way through Congress and the White House as both a cybersecurity and an effectiveness and efficiency play. As OMB said last fall, moving to a modern infrastructure and cloud-based solutions is a fundamental necessity to building a digital government that is responsive to citizens' needs and secure by design. And doing so will enhance agencies' ability to protect data, reduce costs, and deliver world-class services to the public. So, with that context in place, let's again turn to our panelists. Justin Herman, who leads the Emerging Citizen Technology Program at the General Services Administration, Marcy Jacobs, the Design Practice Director for the U.S. Digital Service in the White House, and Acting Agency Lead for Digital Service Team at the Veterans Affairs Department, Aisha Davina, the former Senior Advisor in the Office of Administrator at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and Daryl Hillary, the Federal Director of Strategic Alliances for Kodak Alaris. So let me start at the far end of the table with Marcy. We'll put you on the spot first, since you are both the Design Practice Director and Digital Lead, Acting Digital Lead at VA. Modernizing citizen services, let's discuss what that means for you and the work you're doing at VA.
Sure. So my background is in design, so I'm always focused on the user impact and the user-centered design of everything that we're touching. What I hear from a lot of agencies is modernizing services is typically approached from a technology or a business or agency perspective, and not as much from a citizen or user perspective who's actually using this service, whether it's an external citizen or the internal employee who is helping to process the service, if it's a benefits application or something like that. So at the VA, we're working on a project called vets.gov, which is pulling together transactions from across lots of different websites and forms across the entire department and improving those, modernizing them, and putting them in one platform to make it both easier for veterans to access, but also making them mobile responsive, making them 508 compliant, looking at plain language, really taking a human-centered approach to modernization and not a technology approach.
And the difference here is not just, okay, if we put this form that was paper and put it online, I mean, that was done early 2000s, that was the lift and shift that we all know it doesn't work anymore, but really saying, are we asking the right questions, and are we making it so that the user, the veteran in this case, can fill it out easily?
Sure.
That's a big piece of it?
That's a big piece of it, but it's also when you take a paper form, you have to fill out all the information. It's a standalone item. When you have all that information in a system, you don't need to ask the questions that you already know the answers to. So how do we use technology to empower our users? How do we think about forms in a different way? If you have to change one field, your address, Why don't we just make you update that one field and not make you fill out a 60-question profile update form or whatever it is, and really trying to think about data separate from the vehicle that it's collected in. So moving away from PDFs, moving away from paper, and moving into more of a collecting data and information in a way that technology can help support the people who use it.
Aisha, from your experience at CMS, talk a little bit about how you were building on and using very similar to the efforts that Marcy just described.
Yeah, there's something Marcy said that I think really resonated with me. It was talking about a lot of people think about modernizing as sort of exclusively focused on the technology, and I think, and Marcy and I had the pleasure of actually working together while I was at CMS, and I think for us, a lot of the modernizing was also thinking about the engagement and how you understand who you're acting with. And so for me, technology was there as a support mechanism, and a lot of it was understanding who you were intending to engage with, how they were going to engage with you, and how to then improve that process. So the modernizing was all about trying to make the programs and the interactions of the programs as effective as possible. And so we were having to rethink not only the technology piece of it, but also the whole communications and outreach, training infrastructure, call center operations that aligned with that, as well as the policy elements that actually then implemented the entire programs. So it was sort of across the whole set of operations that we were thinking about how to modernize how we operated.
You had to bring all those, if you will, the stakeholders in the room together. Did they get that this is not just about the policy side, or this is not just about the training side, but this is the policy, the training, all the pieces and parts that have to work together?
I think for us, what was really a catalyst in terms of bringing that sort of I'll call it concentric view together, was really seeing firsthand some of the user research sessions and feedback from the target audience. So this was, for us, it was the provider community. So the administrator was very forthright in making sure that we understood that audience, and so they did listening events across the country, recruited the small physician practice, the rural doctor, the family practice guy, brought them in to a room for 2 hours and tape recorded those sessions. I mean, the administrator himself listened to over 16 hours of video about those. And hearing those statements firsthand and saying that, the IRS was preferred to CMS in terms of their relationship, that was really a sort of, a punch to the gut for a lot of people who really were working very hard to implement these programs in ways that they thought and were well intended, but didn't realize how painful they were in the execution and implementation. And so seeing that firsthand was really a catalytic moment, I think, for a lot of people that we interacted with. And I think that people held on to as they thought about the scope of the work that they were executing.
And with all due respect to our friends at the IRS, there's nothing to take away from their work, but right, they do have the unfortunate reputation of as being the toughest government agency. Justin, you get to look at it from a different perspective. GSA obviously does a lot of work both internally and externally, but you're bringing maybe a different perspective. Talk about how you see this.
I mean, what could be talked about the challenges that they're speaking about in their projects that haven't already been said about the show The Big Bang Theory. It's terrible, and it's a punch in the gut to deal with. What we did is, what we do with our program is we work, of course, in supporting and helping missions across government and other agencies. So really, even when we do things, it's never our success at GSA, it's the success of the mission where they are. That also gives us a fantastic vantage point of being able to analyze what are the emerging trends, what are the pain points, what are the things that shared services could approach, what are the things that are perhaps cultural barriers that are preventing people from really actualizing the full potential of the mission. So that's why after when you talked earlier about the public participation playbook that we put together. Again, we worked with about 40 agencies on it. We had learned from the US, I think it was the digital playbook that they had put out. We loved that format, so we stole it, and again, wanted to put just the punches, 12 steps together, and then we knew and we saw using this analysis, and as agencies were using the playbook, we were able to really identify a mixture of the fact that we knew that there was so much we were leaving on the table mission-wise. Again, and if any public servant doesn't tell you that at the end of the day they don't feel some emptiness or a little bit of miss, because you know that there's so much more we could be doing, and we have data to support it. Now, it might be structured, might be unstructured, but we know that potential is there, but it's being left on the table. It's a source of frustration. So what we did is we launched what's called the Emerging Citizen Technology Program, specifically to identify what are those things that we know that there's the business need across agencies. We know that there's probably data to support it, either structured or unstructured, but nothing exists, not culturally, not policies, not recommendations, not guidance, no roadmaps exist. So right now we spend most of our time with artificial intelligence, automation, and we're about to launch a government-wide blockchain initiative to analyze that. And again, this is based on the needs described by agencies themselves. But as they were saying earlier, the technology is secondary, and third to it, what really we're doing is we're working together across government to focus on the business cases and the needs and learning how to articulate them in such a way that opens it up so businesses can come in and help us provide the solutions to it. And so that's kind of the perspective and where we're coming at it. And really the only tyranny of the situation right now is the amount of options ahead, because of course we're being asked to do more with less, and that's something we completely welcome. But that being said, we have to be smarter and more strategic. I mean, innovation isn't just creating a website or doing something like, you know what I mean, these one-offs. We have to think holistically about the entire experience and how we're leveraging data in order to make it so, quite frankly, I don't want people to have to go to websites. I don't want to have people to have to pick up a phone and call. I want to, you know what I mean? There should be an entire process holistic, and it's going to change the way we think on it.
So I definitely want to go to the trends and the pain points in a second. There's plenty of talk there, and we could talk all day about the blockchain initiative, because obviously my news antenna perks up when you say we're about to launch. But we're going to turn to Daryl instead, because he's been sitting here patiently waiting. Daryl, talk a little bit about what you're hearing from the panel so far and what you're seeing with your federal customers.
So what we're seeing is that everybody's got these great modernization efforts that they're trying to go and enable, right? And what's nice to see is that the customer engagement aspect of it is really now a focus. And as a solutions provider, we enjoy working with you guys from a customer base to make sure that as you're creating these processes, they inherently create their own problems, right? So we talked about that unstructured data that comes along with it. Everybody wants to make database decisions, data-driven decisions to help that level of customer engagement, but some of the processes just actually create more unstructured data inside themselves. So even when you go and redesign a form that you were trying to get rid of, what kind of backblow comes behind it in regards to, are you going to be able to utilize additional information that comes along with it? So as a solutions provider, we ask the questions, I know we're going to design this for digital, but are we designing this for data? Can we make a smarter electronic document so that your legacy system can still utilize it? Your future cloud strategy, it'll be integrated inside of that. Will you be able to take a look at your process and workflow that you have right now that you're actively redesigning and trying to enhance it and make it better and make it intuitive, less touch points, less places for human error? We know for a fact the less people have an opportunity to go inside and touch something, the smoother and more efficient it's going to be, which is going to raise that level of customer experience. Are we doing that at a design standpoint? And are we looking at the legacy systems that are still there that we know aren't going to go away? How can we make sure that all of the future state projects that we have tie into that as seamlessly as possible, and keeping that in mind as we go forward?
Justin?
I was about to say, we keep bringing this up. It's like the allegory of Plato's Cave. You know, cave, there's the fire, people think that the fire's reality, but you're actually focused on the shadows of the wall. That's what we see with data-driven decision-making right now, is that there is no shortage of ways that you can cut up, shape, and put it in an Excel spreadsheet or some document data and to be able to justify whatever bad decision that you're making. And so just because somebody's claiming that they're doing data-driven decision-making, that, you know what I mean? It's like, so that's why it's, again, it's not chasing the tail of the technology or the data, but having to focus in on the business case to make sure that when we're looking and we're analyzing, that we're seeing the truth out of it, or as close to the truth as we can for accurate decision making. Because again, we're awash in it now.
Marcy, jump in.
So what I think is interesting when you talk about IT modernization is it has to be looked at outside of all of the business silos, which is typically the way the government is funded and typically the way systems are procured, built, bought, whatever. Looking at, we have all of this data. Every agency is collecting tons and tons of information and doesn't always know the right way to use it, but really doesn't, what I've seen is a lot of inability to connect the dots. What does a change in this program mean to the call volume at the call center? Has that made a positive impact or a negative impact? How many applications, now that we've gotten rid of paper, are we decreasing how many people actually go into a physical location to fill out a form with a human being, which of course costs a lot more money than if we can make it a self-service, and it's obviously a lot more burdensome for an individual who has to travel and fill out paper. So how do these channels interact with each other? How are we thinking about modernization from a portfolio standpoint and not just from a single touch point? This one system may be better, great, but if the login system is still broken, you still have a problem. If it's still confusing for people to get through to some piece of it, then you still have a high call volume. So how do we connect the dots?
Aisha?
Yeah, I think both of these conversations just made me just remember so many sort of painful moments where.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I mean, in ways that I think really enlighten things. I mean, Marcy's absolutely right. I mean, things are procured and funded, programmatically specific, and so at CMS, our landscape was. Program-specific transactional systems, and all of a sudden, I mean, the program that we were looking at was sort of reimagining Medicare and the Medicare payment system, and so all of a sudden you're taking these like historical programs and cutting sideways across the entire enterprise. And so you had, this data silo over here collecting data elements, and that data silo over there, and similar but somewhat different data elements, and all of a sudden how do you bring them together and what is the truth? And so it was really trying to get this a much stronger discipline of what's the hypothesis we're testing, like how do we need to answer it, and what's the problem we're trying to solve, and determining which data elements are give us the greatest data integrity, and can bring those together to make the right kinds of decisions. And at the end of the day, all of that data was to try to understand who are we affecting, how are we affecting them, and how then do we know both policy-wise, outreach, implementation, how that's going to be manifested outwards. And so that was really, I think it was a very painful exercise, but I think one that just really brought people together in terms of trying to use that to also make forward-thinking decisions about what technologies we're investing in going forward and for what purposes.
That's a fascinating example because it's the who and the what starting at the front end versus so many times we hear about efforts starting at the back end. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation. You're listening to the panel discussion, Modernizing the Citizen Journey Through Data, sponsored by Kodak Alaris on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.